Great, and you?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to see you.
To see you too.
Oh, we've started.
Yes, we have allowed people in now. Good morning. But it's okay, it's very casual. It doesn't have to be, yeah. But, good morning, ladies. Welcome to our webinar where we will be discussing the gender mainstreaming in property. And we have such a great, amazing lineup of speakers today and panelists. And we are pretty excited. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce every panelist that is with us today. And from there, we'll go through the different questions that we will be addressing the panelists with. And then the audience themselves will have the opportunity to ask questions that they also feel are important when it comes to this topic of gender mainstreaming. Now, just to give a little bit of context as to how we came about with this particular topic and discussion, we understand that gender mainstreaming or gender equality is the #5 goal of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And as part of Triumphant Zoe's mission, we really want to see women being more involved and actively involved in the property space. So this is what basically came about, how this idea came about, and I engaged with the speakers, and they were more than willing, to join into this discussion. So our first panelist for today is Hari, and she is the co-founder and the CEO of Mutsing Investment Holdings and a pioneering entrepreneur. He established the first Black women-owned CCTV business. And in 2007, Ipiling became the national chairperson of the Women's Property Network and spearheaded the vision to introduce a diverse membership base, a mentorship program, as well as an educational trust, which supports educating marginalized women in the industry. And so in November 2012, she was a promoter of Delta Property Fund, which is doing quite well, multiplying up to the 11 billion range right now. And in 2019, Mutsing Kagiso Trust, as well as the South African Property Diversity Council, launched the Property Entrepreneur Accelerator, which today has 13 entrepreneurs as their first co-host, which is quite exciting news. And Ipiling also holds a Bachelor of Social Science degree and has also completed the Executive Development Program at the West Business School and is an Archbishop Tutu Fellow. Wow, quite amazing accomplishments there. Ipiling has served on various boards of unlisted and listed businesses, the public sector, and non-profit organizations. She's also actively involved in the Women Property Network Education Trust, and is a director and past president of the South African Property Owners Association 2019 year. And Ipiling is very passionate about the development and ascension of women in business and has been an ambassador of various women's business organizations. I think we are in very good company this morning.
Yeah, the calamari was so good. Calamari.
Yeah. Well done.
I'm in a webinar.
Sorry about that, everyone. Some people, they didn't realize that we had already started. I'm just going to finish introducing Ipiling in terms of her accomplishments. Cosmopolitan Mover of the Year in 2007. And she was named one of CEOs Magazine's most influential women in business in 2008. And the Times March 2012 featured her as one of 20 movers and shakers in Africa. Oh my goodness. I'm online, please. And the Pioneer Women of the Year, this is the joy of working from home, And so she's also been named the Pioneer Women of the Year Award by Forbes Women Africa in 2015. And in 2016, she was awarded the Standard Bank Top Women in Property Award. So Ipiling is married and is a mom of 3 inspiring daughters. Welcome, Ipiling, and thank you so much for being with us today. And then I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Colleen Larson. So she is the founder of the Business Engage and the Gender Mainstreaming Awards, an initiative to reward the private sector who are buying into the diversity, especially regarding the gender mainstreaming. So Colleen is an author of 2 books. I think we will all need to get these books. It's the best practices in gender mainstreaming for the private sector, as well as the Gender Matters, a practical response to the slippery ladder. And Colleen is also a custodian of the 30% Club Southern Africa, as well as a representative on the steering committee for the International Labour Organization Program on Gender. And Colleen is one of the 11 ILO cadres in South Africa accredited by the ILO as experts in women entrepreneurship development. Colleen is also accredited by the ILO to carry out participatory gender reviews in companies, and also a finalist in South Africa's Most Influential Women in Business and Government Award 2012, as well as being nominated once again in 2013. And so Colleen is the founding member of the New Faces, New Voices, which is a group that was established by Mrs. Gracia Machel to uplift women in the financial services industry and facilitate access to finance for women. Thanks, Colleen, and lovely to have you today with us. And then our third speaker for today is Nonhlanhla Mayisela. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Izandla Property Fund, a majority Black-owned women and managed property investment company. Izandla owns commercial assets under management of value of about 800 million. And with her 15 years experience in the property industry, Nonhlanhla specializes in commercial property investments, development, as well as fund management. Now, prior to her appointment as the CEO of Izandla Property, she was with the Airports Company South Africa, where she was responsible for driving the property development and marketing strategy for the 4 international and 5 regional airports owned and managed by AXA. Now, Nonhlanhla is the national chairperson of the Women's Property Network, which is a board, and she's also a board member of the Property Sector Charter Council, as well as a member of the South African Property Owners Association, and a 2014 fellow of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellowship Program. And Nonhlanhla is a multi-layered leadership learning experience. The fellow program of Desmond Tutu is actually a multi-leadership learning experience that focuses on African leadership and global context. If anyone hasn't muted, may I ask that you mute, please, so we don't get interruptions. Thank you. Thank you, Nonhlanhla, for joining us. Lovely to have you.
I think we've lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Let me just check my network. It says I'm connected. Can you hear me now? Okay. Welcome, Nonhlanhla. I'm going to introduce. Hello, everyone. Are you still there?
Hi, Trifina.
Hi.
We lost you for a second there.
Oh, okay. But
it seems like it should be fine now.
Was I done introducing you at the time?
You were at the tail end, so I can go to the next speaker introduction.
Okay, thank you, Nonhlanhla. Thanks for being with us today, Nonhlanhla. The next speaker for today is Kojo. It's Coco Kojo, and Coco started her career. Okay. Coco started her career as an entrepreneur and for 15 years traded across West, East, and Southern Africa. She transitioned into the development sector 18 years ago and has supported flagship entrepreneurship programs with organizations like your Gibbs Business School, your World Women's Development Bank, and the TechnoServe. Over the last 5 years in her role as the Women Economics and Social Advancement Program Manager at the Gracia Machel Trust, she facilitated network building and supporting coalitions of women in finance, agribusiness, and business federations across 17 countries in order to advance the gender equality. Now, Coco designed the Women Creating Wealth Entrepreneurship Program, and started the Trust Leadership Development Program, which began with the Postgraduate Scholarship Alumni. Now, these initiatives have helped to increase women's ability to influence greater gender equality and enhance their skills and confidence to lead in business. She now consults to the Gracia Machel Trust as the Women Economic and Social Advancement Program Advisor and Technical Support. Coco has a BCom from the University of Swaziland, a Master's in Public Development from the University of Witwatersrand, and a certified coach from the University of Cape Town. Thank you so much, Coco, for joining us. And now I'm going to introduce our final speaker for today, Portia Tau Sikati. Portia is the CEO of the Property Sector Charter Council, and she leads and drives the transformation of the property sector and has had an extensive knowledge and is a specialist in transformation and is driven by the South African legislation framework of the Broad-Based Economic Empowerment Act. Now, Portia convenes all 12 South African sector councils and has also assisted and supported many sector councils in various requirements to enable the sector councils to successfully be set up and to deliver against their mandate. And she was part of the team that developed the Management Development Program on Triple BEE curriculum on behalf of the Department of Trade and Industry for UNISA and VET. And she also lectures on transformation as well as, property sector codes at UNISA, SBL, VET, UJ, and UCT School of Graduate Business. Now, Portia has extensive knowledge and experience in dealing with lobbying government, and she has written South African legislation on women empowerment framework and has also written various programs and supported many departments and organizations on the implementation of their policies on sustainable, inclusive economic strategies. That is quite a mouthful of speakers that we have today. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone coming together to address this gender mainstreaming topic. I'd like to welcome all our participants as well, and thank you for your time of being with us today. And so we are going to delve into all these different questions that we have, but do feel free also, because we would like to engage with you as the participants. Feel free to use the chat to type in your questions that we would then be able to address at the end of our discussion. I'm going to, actually take the first question and address it to Ipileng. Not Ipileng, actually. Let me start with Colleen, in terms of an understanding of what is this gender mainstreaming, because we might have participants who are not quite versed with this topic.
Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you all for joining us here today. And so we're very well aware of women empowerment, diversity, women's issues, and essentially gender mainstreaming is really a topic that has developed internationally over the last couple of years, because we haven't really seen the progress that we've been looking at. And it was, what is the missing link? And the missing link is that gender has to become strategic. Specifically in corporates, and we are talking about the corporate environment now and people dealing with the corporates, it's got to become strategic. Unless it is meaningful to the organization, unless that actually is part of the strategy, we will never see the change that we're looking for. It's really not a women's issue, it's a business issue. And so the strategic intent of an organization needs to be integral to gender. Well, gender's got to be integral to the strategic intent. But it's not about just a women's issue. It really is about bringing men along with the conversation. We've coined the word corporate gender intelligence, and that is, once you get the women and men working together, it's that aha moment that something is different. And so in order to find any success in this environment, we need to look at gender from a strategic perspective.
Thank you so much for that very good definition of this gender mainstreaming. I understand it's not just about women empowerment, as you're saying, it's about bringing men along as well. And perhaps Ipulen could also, elaborate further on that in terms of, what are the reasons that we are seeing, non-representation of women in this property space?
Thank you so much, Trifina, and really lovely to see so many participants, and thanks for the platform. I think that, as Colina's just said, the whole conversation around mainstreaming of anything, if you just consider any corporate or organization that we work in, that the core focus of a business is what they do in the main. And I think essentially gender mainstreaming for me is so important because it talks about bringing women out of the periphery, not being part of a tick box exercise in terms of fulfilling numbers, but actually forming part of the key strategy, as Colleen suggests. Now, your question is obviously, what would kind of cause and what would the reason be for people? Sorry, I'm listening to so much.
Sorry. Can I ask that everyone please mute, please? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Sorry
much.
about that.
It's much better when we all muted. Thank you. Thanks, Trifina. The core question being, what would be causing this lack of representation in the property sector? There are so many, I suppose, so many answers that one could give, but I've got a couple in my mind that I think become very important. Representation in my mind is about active engagement. Active engagement in any business or in any sector, I think, requires three key pillars in order for us to see that representation being lived in organizations. And I think the first for me becomes policy and research. So I hope we're going to touch a little bit on what are the policy objectives and what is the research that we're doing in our sector specifically that would allow us to begin to compare one entity to another, compare women skills development to other skills gaps, because that essentially will be the bedrock that will allow us, the information that will allow us to help women to understand what their trajectory opportunities are, but also to help organizations to make this mainstreaming key to their own organizations. And I think information becomes very important because any organization in the property sector exists to grow, exists for its shareholders. So for gender mainstreaming, in my mind, to be a key part of that conversation, there's got to be information, and that's got to be about active engagement. It can't be a response to a requirement or a need. It's got to be part and parcel of the DNA of the organization. I think the second thing for me, Trifina, that speaks to this issue of potentially lack of representation in the industry, if I just look at the paths of many women that I know in the commercial property sector and the broader industry, we're talking about really how we've interacted in this industry since the dawn of democracy. It's 1994. So you're talking about just over 2 decades of opportunity where visibility and this active engagement could actually now come alive for women. And so it's a very short space of time for us to actually measure. But when you look at that period of time, you've got to understand that up until 1994, I really didn't know many women who were in the industry. And up until I started my career in 1998, there were just so few women that I could kind of recognize, particularly in leadership. So I think the second thing around this representation issue is that there's got to be visibility and leadership. And so women themselves and men who are visible need to lead in this conversation, because it can't be a conversation that is relegated just to women. And then I think the last one around the third pillar for me around why we're probably not seeing representation is that you've got to have champions of this conversation. So there's got to be a champion at Mutzing in my organization. We've got to have people who stand up and say, it is important for us to have gender mainstreaming. It is important for us to have women at the core of our strategy, leading in all the key positions. And we've got to deliver, because championing allows deliverability in my mind. So for me, those are the three things that possibly are speaking to why we're not seeing this particular conversation growing at larger or accelerating at a larger pace in the property sector. And I think the time period becomes very important because we've been in this now for 20 odd years. We've got to set a path going forward in terms of how this can get taken into for future generations.
I've just now muted myself. Thank you so much for that great answer that I think most of us don't even think about those things. Those three pillars that you've spoken about, I believe, are very, very important, and we need to continue driving and championing and having the visible leaders ahead as well. People who stand up for this gender mainstream, both male and female, must be involved. And I'm going to now, ask Nonhlanhla as well, to give us her input in terms of, the status of the female representation and looking at what Ipileng is talking about. What information do we have? And what kind of policies can we also put in place? And in terms of the research that you are aware of in different sectors, let's say listed sector or the built environment sector, and the services, as well as just the different levels of seniority, I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Triumphant. Thanks for the opportunity to engage in this discussion. I think firstly, I completely agree with Ipileng in terms of having information and data at our disposal to enable us to put measures and mechanisms in place for us to drive gender mainstreaming in our industry. And I would say, say for the data that exists within the Property Sector Charter Council with regards to representation as per the BEE codes, there's so much more data that we need to consolidate just around what exists and the dynamics that are there. But if one takes a look at the different segments of our industry, the first one being the listed sector, again, top of mind without having the stats, what's visible is within the context of 30 plus SA listed REITs, I think we have one female CEO. Historically, we've had one or two that have come and gone. And I think I make that point around historically, we've kind of had these green shoots here and there, but the issue is around sustainability of representation. So in the listed space, that's the current landscape. If you look at the market cap of the listed REIT sector, that's over 300 billion. And if you consider one CEO that is driving one entity that comprises a very small component of that 300 billion, there isn't much that women can do in that context in terms of driving change. Limited numbers in terms of female executives, again, in the listed space, CFOs, COOs. I think we've gained more traction with regards to female representation at a non-executive level. But again, I think where the tar hits the mat is where there is executive representation, where decisions are made regarding hiring, procurement, that's where the action takes place. And that's been limited at exco representation, etc. The next segment of our property industry is the built environment, which in essence includes 7 subsectors: architecture, engineering, landscape architects, project construction management, property valuations, quantity surveying, which is where you're operating, for instance, Triumphant. And again, I think the extent of representation there is very limited. And what you find in this particular segment is you have a lot of representation at a junior and a middle management level, if you're talking about the much bigger organizations. And then you have women leading businesses in the consultancy area of the built environment. But the question there is, are women gaining the scale that is required in that instance? And what we found is, even where there is representation, there is no scale. And certainly there's no transition from junior and middle management into senior management in those type of organizations in the built environment, where decisions are actually made and where women can drive this narrative with regards to gender mainstreaming. So, sorry, Triumphant?
Sorry about that. There was just someone I had to mute quickly, but please do continue.
No worries. Yeah, and then if you look at kind of the last segment in my mind of the real estate sector is the services segment, your property and facilities management sector, real estate agents, brokers, etc. And I think Portia will be able to maybe provide a bit more color in terms of numbers. But again, in that services sector where we can really drive job creation. So you talk about growth of the sector and where it's going to come from in this current environment. That's where it's going to come from. It's not going to come from the bigger corporates, the listed REITs. That's not where growth is coming from. And certainly that's not where job creation is coming from. And again, we see the limitation of representation, particularly with female-led businesses. There's so many, and Ipeleng, you play in this sector, in this segment of the sector quite significantly. There are entities that are led by women in this particular sector that have been in existence since the dawn of our democracy. 20 years old, 10 years old, 5-year-old entities that are still not able to scale up their businesses. And I think my underlying point here is, how do we create sustainability in gender mainstreaming? Because we've seen a lot of success stories, but it's never sustainable. And it speaks to, I think, the systemic issues that we have in our industry that we've got to deal with. And it really is this dialogue and debate that Ipeleng speaks of in order for us to get to a point where we can have concrete steps and mechanisms to drive this, this diversity. So, I mean, that just provides landscape. I want to believe that there is a commitment in the sector to change this narrative. And I mean, it's quite a gloomy picture that I'm painting. But I think the challenge has been always to convert that commitment, you know, to concrete steps and action. And that's where we continue finding ourselves. I think the last point I'd like to make, just around the landscape of the industry. You know, property industry has enjoyed tremendous growth, I think, in the last kind of 10, 15 years. And where we found ourselves in the last kind of 3 years, especially now, is the sector's going backwards. And each of these segments that I've mentioned, in terms of growth, the sector's going backwards. And what you find in an environment that is constrained, where we are in a recession, is the minority groups, i.e. women, Black people, are then marginalized even more. So the discussion we should be having is, where are women placed in this current environment, and where will they be placed post you know, the crisis being behind us? And how do we ensure that those women that had participated in the sector before, whether within organizations, senior leadership levels within organizations, or female-led businesses, how do we ensure that they continue to sustain themselves in an environment that is very difficult to operate in?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, really, this conversation is so deep, it's so multifaceted. There is so much that we need to delve into. And, you know, just the sustainability alone, the aspect of sustainability, you know, of, you know, women-owned businesses, that is key as well, because it's one thing to, you know, be a CEO of a business for 1 year, 2 years, but then what about the next 10 years and, you know, 20 years and so forth? So I think it's something that we really need to delve much deeper into. And I believe, I mean, Ipeleng will also be able to share with us, you know, some of her experiences, you know, being that woman who has led in the industry for over 20 years, you know, which I think is something that we need to see more people, you know, being able to do. And also looking at the listed sector, where there's one woman alone, you know, yeah, we have to really start to understand what needs to change, what needs to happen. And I believe, you know, Portia could elaborate, you know, also on the Property Charters Council's, you know, stand on the, you know, gender mainstreaming, and also what are the numbers that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Transfina, and thank you for inviting us to really this important topic. And it's really critical that we really engage on such topic, and not only once, and not only as we approach the Women Month coming in August, but throughout the entire year in many platforms that we are able to that are being created. But I think for me, what is critical about mainstreaming is it's from many perspectives. And currently, I mean, the last statistics by Stats SA in 2019, last year, around about Feb, March, the the population of South Africa is about 58.77. So let's say 58.8 million people that are in a country. And then out of that, males are 49% and females are almost close to 51%. And obviously females have just have contracted a little bit in terms of the percentage, because over the years, those numbers, females were about 55, 45. So slowly, females, they are now just 49 versus 50 in favor of women. And that's the stats of women in the country as we currently sit along. But what is the important aspect about this gender mainstreaming? Well, the important part about it is that for any country to be able to reach its optimal desired growth, economic growth, you've got to be able to create an opportunity for everybody to equally participate in it. So there is actually no way that we will actually be able to reach the desired goals unless there's an equal opportunity for everybody to participate. Should we limit ourselves to only the males at 49% that are participating, we certainly would not be able to reach actually the desired growth that we wish to bring, to grow in. So it is critical that you create that opportunity for everyone to participate. And Ipeleng says it very nicely, that participating in the mainstream, not in the periphery, but in the mainstream of the economy. Not in the supporting area, but the hardcore, that part of the business that cannot be outsourced to anybody else because it's so hardcore to you, it's so mainstream. So it's actually absolutely critical that we create that opportunity. And when you participate in the mainstream, it requires particular level of support from various angles and from various areas. Some of the areas, and then Nonhlanhla touches upon it, is leadership and then resource allocation. It is important that in a lot of organizations, associations that we participate, that there is leadership commitment. And Nonhlanhla talks about, yes, I would wish to think that there is that commitment, but for us to bring that commitment to fruition, we actually need to actually see those things translating into deliverables and performances that we can see. So it is absolutely important that we do see that leadership participation in commitment in gender mainstreaming from both our leaders. And we have the experience where we've seen in organizations where leaders are committed. So where you see CEOs, CFOs are committed to transformation, and then you see some drastic changes. You see some excellent performance, people moving from level 2 to, people moving from level 6 to about level 2 in about a year and a half. So it's that level of commitment. But similarly, it's the resources as well. Resources, you need to allocate reasonable resources, both financial resources, both people resources, even effort. Resources in relation to effort, the effort that you put behind something in order for you to deliver. So from that perspective, it is important that we start looking at how those allocation of resources, and those resources are normally given at management control. So management control, those are the people that actually makes decisions. So at management control, you get directors, you get executives that actually decides on strategic operation and strategic direction and operational direction of a company. So at strategic direction of a company, you get board of directors. Those would be the women where Colleen and them are sitting on, and then actually on with that 30 Club program, that would be those directors. But at an executive level where people are deciding on executive strategies, those are the executives that Nonhlanhla is referring on, people that drive the strategy. And for most of those people that have set in listed entities, you would know that most of them, a business plan is written by executive directors. And yes, the board has got an opportunity to basically be able to change the strategy here and there, but the hard core of it is actually was developed by the executive, and which is where we are lacking. And we see it also in listed entity, we see it in major organizations. So we actually need to actually start, not only talk to ourselves, as actually Colleen actually was saying, and Ipeleng was saying a little bit earlier, we also need to engage them in, because sometimes when you talk to yourself about the problems you have, you end up just complaining. So we've got to broaden this conversation and bring along the other men that are along and say, we need to actually be participating in those spaces that you're in. So mainstreaming becomes important for us to participate, but get leadership to actually commit people that are in leadership, get resources to be allocated to actually that it happens, and it happens appropriately and accordingly and in line with the targets that we would like to see, in line with the Millennium Goals that you spoke on when you actually opened the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Portia. Definitely, if we have 51% of females in South Africa and they are not able to actually participate in the mainstream of business, definitely we will not be able to achieve the growth that we want to see. And I'd like to now bring in Coco to just share with us also her view from the Gracia Machel Trust's Women Creating Program with us in terms of gender mainstreaming. You are muted, Coco.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us, Trifina. And so I think in talking to Women Creating Wealth, I think there's a bigger program. Women Creating Wealth falls under our bigger program called Women Economic and Social Advancement Program. And the purpose of the program is exactly what my previous speakers have spoken to. Women Economic and Social Advancement Program purpose is really how do we increase the representation and participation of women across different sectors. And we've heard about where the resources, so it's in finance. How do we get more women represented in the financial services sector so that they can influence those policies, so that they can also lead in ways that represent women as champions, and they can also work with other, hopefully male champions, because I think what Portia said just now is really important, because change doesn't just happen. It says, often we say that power is not given, it is taken. But to be able to do that, you also need to be able to influence it, right? And in these sectors where there's a lot of male domination, it's important that we're strategic in who we bring on board to partner with us to be able to influence the change that we want. So a few years ago, under the WESA program, we have a scholarship program that a postgraduate scholarship program that trains women in masters and PhDs to increase their skills to be able to represent themselves in sectors where women are underrepresented. And over 5 years, we went back to do a survey to find out whether these women that we were training with higher qualifications were getting into the leadership positions that we expected that would happen. And we realized it actually is not automatic, that when women are highly qualified, they get to lead they get to have kind of very significant leadership and decision-making positions. So we realized that, I think everybody's spoken to this now, that leadership is really important. How do you develop women's leadership attributes and confidence and talents to be able to lead in these sectors? But I think there's also, there's another dimension to it as well, which is, I think we need to look at what, the nature of women and how many women really want to do the struggle and the fight to get to the top. So, so there's a balance that we need to have between, inspiring women to lead, which is what Mrs. Machel does. I mean, her purpose is to really inspire as many women as possible to lead, because it matters that we lead. So there's the inspiration, but there's also a responsibility. Because I want to ask Ipuleng, for instance, so why is it that, and Nonhlanhla said it, there are very few women, it seems like we're going back rather than going forward. Why do women fall back? So support is necessary, yes, but I think there's something around the idea of feeling really responsible to be able to do this, to say, it's my responsibility to be part of the change that I want to see and stay and fight long enough to see more transformation happen. So I think there's many things. There's policy, I absolutely agree, which is what we do in terms of advocacy. How do we advocate for more women's representation? But the leadership development is also critical, as well as really women taking on the responsibility to be able to do it. And of course, the allocation of resources. So in referring quickly to Women Creating Wealth, that's exactly what we do. So in the sectors that, in the networks that we build, we have women in finance, women in agribusiness, women in media, all these areas that we believe women can bring about transformation. But we also build the idea of capacity in women entrepreneurs. So we believe that if we want the change to happen, we can't just do the rights thing and do just advocacy. You have to match it with real power and confidence to be able to lead when the opportunity comes to represent the voice of women in these sectors. So women creating wealth essentially is women in business. You're all in different sectors. Triumphant, you are in construction, you're in the property sector. So the question becomes, how do we give you more confidence, more skill, and more responsibility to say, I am in this sector, I'm going to champion this, right? With male counterparts and with other female women on the program. So I think those the combination of that is really important. I'll give a very quick example of also about women in finance program that we have in at the trust, where we've seen major transformation, say in Zambia, where they did a very significant gender mainstreaming work with the Bank of Zambia, was led by the deputy governor, Dr. Mabula, who had a male champion who was the governor to support her to significantly make that gender mainstreaming transformation there. We also have Kenya, for instance, the Women in Finance, our New Faces, New Voices program, where Andrea Chakava worked with her team of board members in the New Faces, New Voices program to really influence the financial services sector to ensure there's increased representation of women at boards, in the boards of the financial service sector. And they made great transformations. So it takes champions, it takes leadership, it takes people who take the responsibility very seriously to be able to shift the transformation that we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Coco. I hear this word leadership kind of repeating itself quite a lot. And you've also shared a few stories, and you've spoken about inspiration, how important it is to have people who inspire us. And, yeah, I'd just like to now, ask Ipileng just in terms of how, she's mentioned the 3 pillars, that need to be in place for better representation. But just from, your experience, Ipileng, being a woman in business, a woman in property, for over 2 decades, what do you believe has been the difference, in the way that you've managed to, have the staying, presence in that space? And, perhaps just share with us to inspire us, for us, other women who are here today as well, to know, what can they do better for themselves? Yes, we are looking at policies, we are looking at different aspects, but as women, how do we then build each other and build ourselves as well?
So much, Triumphant. It's been so interesting just listening to all the thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to also, hopefully we'll get to hear from the audience and the listeners, because my journey, or our journeys as women, have been very challenging. It is simply not easy, Triumphant, to start up a business and to keep it running. And I think a very, very important point by Nonhlanhla earlier is that the biggest challenge I think that I've found in my business has been this concept of scalability. So I recently picked up a facilities management report put together by a research report put together in 2018-19 by one of our big competitors, Serviced. And it was fascinating, Triumphant, to look at where Muting sits in terms of market share compared to some of our competitors. Like the likes of Bidvest that sit with 1/3 of the market share, one company. And you look at the capability that they have across their value chain. And we sit as 1%, 1% of that entire market. I was shocked that we were even quoted. So I suppose one can say kudos that we were actually recorded in that market share result, because clearly our business has got some share. But it was absolutely challenging for our exco to start to say, now, if we start to look at this research, which is what I was talking about earlier, the statistics, the information, money is going to others and it's not coming to us. And that has to be not just about because we're women or not, it's got to be about how we actually make our businesses scalable. So we're not a Bidvest. We don't provide you know, cleaning services and hygiene and toilet paper and FM and everything else. We bring it together and outsource. But there is a lot of answers in that market research that begins to say where you pitch your business as well becomes very important. So where are the opportunities? Is it in the big business sector, or is it somewhere else? And these are some of the things that I think I want to unpack for women. The question that women need to do better to get further, I have a challenge with. I really do. We are doing our best. And I really need to underscore that. You can't do better than what you're doing. What women requires opportunity, Triumphant, to actually get there. It's not that we're not doing what we need to be doing or that we're worse off, right? So the difference between a Bidvest and a Motsing is not that Bidvest is better. It's that Bidvest has the opportunity and that Motsing may not. And that has to do with whoever sits across the table to give you that opportunity based on what they see in what you can give, whether it's scalability, whether it is size, diversity in your service, and so forth. So I like to remind women that we are an ecosystem ourselves. The women in this group that have the capability to provide business for one another are already an ecosystem that is measurable based on the market share they have, the access to opportunity, the procurement value chain, and so forth, right? That is a very, very, very low-hanging fruit. It's right there in front of you. It's not something that requires Triumphant to pitch 20,000 times to Ipileng why she's good. It should be something that Ipileng says, okay, Triumphant, what is the opportunity? What are we doing? And how do we make it happen? And sometimes we miss that very low-hanging fruit. We miss it as women because we're seeking the big business. And that's what we saw in our company. We said, if this market share is so big, do you know what it tells us? We've been looking at those huge RFPs all the time and the stuff that is massive, where businesses that are absolutely big and global will look at a Motsing and say, you're great, but you're not quite there. And so the pitch needs to come closer to home. The pitch needs to be commensurate to what we believe we actually are able to transact. And that is not dumbing down or taking down what I believe the value of our value proposition is. It's just making sure that we can build that scale at a pace that is right. And that is so important if we look at how we're structured in our economy in South Africa. You know, there is large business and then there's a massive gap and then there's smaller business. And that's a big challenge. That is a structural issue that we can't change as women. So you are your own ecosystem. I think the other second point that I want to say about what can women do to do better, because I reject that, you know, is that there are biases that we all have. And Nonhlanhla mentioned this in our preparation. And Nonhlanhla, I don't want to pick up on something that I know you probably love, because it's something I believe in so much. My kids are showing me so much about biases. There is implicit bias. There are conscious biases. There are unconscious biases. And unfortunately, what we have to acknowledge as women in business now is that we too have biases about one another. And we need to be able to understand what those mean and how those allow us to work together. And in corporate, in property, there are biases. Whatever they might be, they exist. And they are implicit, and they are conscious and they're unconscious. And I think we need to understand that in that conversation, there is a huge, huge need for women to stand up and be exceptionally, I like what Coco said. You know, confidence is a huge, character building is a big thing in business, particularly in the entrepreneurship world. When you say to me 20 years, I don't think the 20 years really is attributable to anything that I've done. It's really got to do with character building and the ability to get up every day and say, I'm going to try again. I'm just going to try again. I've been beaten down so many times. I've lost opportunities, but I believe in what we're doing and I know we can achieve. And that confidence building, Triumphant, year in, year out, creates something that businesses call track record. It's that thing that people come back to and say, oh, you've been there. So as a business that's been in 20 years, I'm nowhere near where I believe we should be as a business in terms compared to our competitors like a Bidvest and a Servest who own 30%, 15% of the market. But I believe I have more to offer now than I did 20 years ago in terms of our business, our value proposition, and our ability to understand what we need to do to become scalable, to partner with others. And I recognize the fact that my sisterhood and the women that I work around and with are the beginning of my ecosystem to begin to work. And I think if I could have ways where we could strengthen that amongst us, that would be the greatest, because that ecosystem has value.
Wow, you know, you've just nailed it on the head. I kept wondering, what am I doing wrong in my business? But I completely get it now. Pitch correctly, and also understand that the women that are surrounding you are your own ecosystem. And actually, women have been doing well. Thank you for that. I retract that statement. And I'd like to also ask, just Colleen to share with us from her work with, gender mainstreaming. What are some of the companies that have been doing well? Let's look at South Africa, and also let's look at, globally. I know we are running out of time, and we did say in the beginning for people to please post their questions in the chat. I don't see any questions. So please take the opportunity now to post questions, because we've got 10 minutes to go. And we'll just, address a few more questions, and then we'll allow for, your chats to come up. Now, Colleen, take us through, some of the companies that are doing well in this gender mainstreaming space, even internationally.
Look, I think gender mainstreaming, I mean, we are far from at a point where we can turn around and say we've arrived. If we look at the companies that are within the 30% club that we manage here in South Africa, internationally, obviously, we are all working towards this 30%. And I think it's very important to note that it's not a target. So many people have said to us, why don't you call it the 50% club? Why don't you call it the 70% club? It's got nothing to do with the target. The only thing is that the 30% is internationally research has proven that once a minority voice has got 30% of the voice, it's a level at which you can influence conversation. So a lot has been done. I think I even pulled out the Bordex report, which I received yesterday. And one of our South African companies, Redefine, did very nicely in terms of the Bordex report, where if I just look at the stats, they were sitting on 50%, 56% board representation. But I need to bring it back to Nonhlanhla's point in that we've really, and Ippeling, where we've really driven the non-executive directors. And so they are doing very well, but 71% are non-executive directors. So, the point is that the whole conversation has gone towards the success that we've achieved in appointing women. But it's not at the point where we are going to be able to drive change. So we've got to start looking more at the executive directorships. But second of all, I think it's really up to where we've tried to perform is to break down the silos between corporates. Because you've got to actually incentivize this where companies are succeeding. So if you take, for instance, like a Bala World Equipment, which is doing very well in the space, it's been an intentional change. So we've got to become a lot more intentional about the work that we're doing in order to affect this change. And then second of all, where women have not done very well, and I take Ippeling's point, I think too often we're told that we've got to have this women in leadership program because we've got to fix the women. They haven't achieved. There are so many amazing women. If you just look at the amount of women that are on this platform today, if you go through, I think, put my head on the block that 99.99, 100%, 150% of these women have got what it takes, but nobody knows about them. So I think where we have really, where we've got a much bigger opportunity as women is to start profiling. So when women turn around and say, well, where are these women? We can't find them. We can get rid of that myth that the women aren't available. We've got umpteen 1,000 women in this country that would be able to step into those roles. It's just that move of the strategy to make sure that women are in the places where decisions are taken. But I think we mustn't forget that just because you've got a woman at the top doesn't mean to say that things are going to change in the organization. The DNA of that woman has to be that when she gets there, she's got to pull others up along behind her. So there's a long way to go. In South Africa, we're only sitting at 27% women on boards. So we've got a long way to go. But I think it can't happen overnight. I've coined a word, evolution. So we don't want it to be an evolution because that will take far too long. But we don't want, and we don't want it to be like this haphazard thing that happens overnight because that's not sustainable. So we want it to be sustainable, this quick evolution that moves us in the right direction.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open up, the floor for questions, seeing that we don't have much time left. I'm just checking the chat here. I see Coco has said, Ipulen, thanks for reinforcing that women work together and collaborate to form their own ecosystem as a means to scale their business. So yeah, definitely we need to work together. So I've got, the list of the people who are on this platform. So if you are, willing, you can let me know so that I can now, start, introducing you to one another, just to share, the network and to see how we can work this ecosystem that we have. And if we don't have any more questions, please, I see Gerald is saying women businesses are really doing well, but collaboration with male business is still required, okay? Also, Gerald, could you clarify the question? Are you saying that women need to do collaborations with men, or are you saying men need to collaborate with other male businesses? And if there are no further questions.
Hi,
yes,
hi everyone. Yes, yes, I was just clarifying that thought. All I'm saying, it's a great time as we move forward to look at collaboration, because really the message is out there as women that you are opening doors and you're doing things that are very well out there and we can see from afar. But that collaboration with still male counterparts still goes even further, especially for information sharing or offloading that information more to be in the power of women businesses as we move forward, as men have to hand over the baton now.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you very much. If anyone else has any question, please post it in the chat. Otherwise, we have 3 minutes left for closing remarks from the speakers. I think we've had quite a great session today. If we just have closing remarks, let's start with Ipileng and then, just move along the speakers as they were introduced.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trifina. Sorry, I was just getting my video back on. I think that I've really enjoyed listening to my colleagues on the call. And Trifina, I think that the closing comment I want to make is the way forward for women really does start with us. And I think that it is a given, but sometimes we tend to seek others to obviously, try and take us forward. I agree with Gerald. I think that there needs to be a lot more collaboration with our male counterparts. And I think this conversation, probably Gerald is probably one of the few men who's in this conversation, and we welcome him. And I think that this conversation needs to be, as I think Portia said earlier, not just amongst us. Conscientizing one another and an entire industry around gender mainstreaming is a long process. And I think that we are able to take it forward just by being the champions in terms of how we do it and how we try to represent this conversation. So thank you so much for the opportunity just to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Colleen, your closing remarks.
Yeah, I just think it's so wonderful to see so many women coming together, and what I would love to see is more men on the platform next time. But I always say to the women, you know, we have all of these events, and they go and invite all of their friends, all of their women colleagues to the event, but they never invite the men. And so my challenge to everybody here is, when you have the next session, is to bring the men along. Because unless they know, I mean, this isn't a male bashing exercise, you know, it's got nothing, it's got to do with all of us working together on objectives that all of us have. So, I mean, even if you look at the different sectors, even though they are competitors out in the market, with regards to gender issues, they're not competitors. So bring the men along, bring your other competitors along, and make things happen.
Thank you so much. I actually put this invite out to everyone I know. I just said gender mainstreaming, and I did not say male or female. So everyone was welcome. And Nonhlanhla, welcome to all the gentlemen. I see there's quite a few. I see Simpiwe. I saw Kwanele, my PDP classmate, also had joined us. So there are quite a few men, which we welcome. Nonhlanhla, your closing remarks?
Thanks, Triumphant. We didn't get to discuss just what the impact of unconscious bias means when it comes to this discussion. And I think we've got a long way to go in terms of increasing awareness, you know, within our respective spheres, and particularly at a leadership level in our industry, of unconscious bias, and just around how decisions are taken, continuously questioning the cultural stereotypes that exist within our organizations, and how those either facilitate or disable the ability for diversity to take place. And I think for me, there are probably three layers to the discussion of representation, particularly when it comes to gender. I think the first layer is, you know, around diversity. And I think we all know diversity is about representation, and probably, you know, we can easily do that in terms of bringing in more women to participate or be representative of what our sector looks like. And that's always being invited to the dance. And then there's inclusion for me. And that's having a seat at the table, which is what the crux of this discussion is really about. And having a seat at the table is, you know, people inviting you to come and dance. So the opportunities that Ipeleng speaks of, you know, women have the ability and the capacity and resources, but we need access to those opportunities. And then the last thing, which is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, but where you actually achieve the sustainable inclusion, is belonging. And that is owning your seat at the table, and where you're now meaningfully participating economically in this value chain and in this ecosystem that we're talking about. And that is, in essence, becoming a superstar on the dance floor. So I think we've got to look at those three layers in terms of where we are and where we need to transcend to. And really the challenge back to us as an industry is how we create that environment of belonging for women. Thanks, Triumphant.
Thank you so much. I see there's a comment about biases here from Tito. Maybe quickly touch on that. You know, he posted a question here. What are some of the solutions for, you know, for a person who's trying to be promoted at work? If you are a junior in management and trying to access leadership positions, but you never get that promotion because of some of the biases mentioned, what are some of the solutions? Maybe Nonhlanhla, you can just take that one for that person.
Yeah, I think you know, it's a journey. And I mean, we always talk about, you know, the issue of unconscious bias always comes up when there's crisis or lack of representation. Suddenly we want to find out what the reasons are. But again, it's a conscious decision that an organization and leadership need to make, to understand what the lived experiences are of minority groups. So in this instance, if you're a junior female that is trying to get to a position of leadership, you want to have people that are representative of who you are. And therein lies the problem. For as long as leadership is not diverse enough or representative enough of the construct of our population, just in South Africa, we're going to have that challenge, because all of us have unconscious bias. So I want to do business with people that look like me, have the same background, and this is where the issue is. So you've almost got to find somebody, I suppose, at leadership, and hopefully somebody that is able to relate to who you are, that can then be able to sponsor you and mentor you through that process of getting to leadership. In the absence of individuals like that are in leadership positions, it becomes very difficult for somebody that's in a junior position that is female, that is trying to transcend into that space. And it is about relationships, right, which is the hardest thing. And that's how you break down the walls of unconscious bias. So it's a journey, but I think you've got to identify people within your environment that are able to understand, where you're coming from and what it is you are trying to achieve, and hopefully be in a position that they can influence the direction of your growth trajectory within that environment.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's very well said. Building relationships can definitely break down those walls. I hope that Tito is assisted with that answer. Portia, please, could you give us your closing remarks?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, so many good aspects and facts were actually mentioned. But one of my closing remarks is just gender mainstreaming is important, but it also needs to be supported by this disaggregated data. So this is because without this data, it's very difficult sometimes, especially when you're sitting around the tables where the resources are limited, that you are able to say, allocate these enough resources, both physically, human, financial, and even effort-wise towards these women. But it is important because, women, especially women that engage in entrepreneurial activity, we see more women that are engaged in entrepreneurial activity. 27 versus 39. And most of them are driven by necessity, not even the anxiety of I've always wished to be, but it's the necessity of being a mom, of running a family, of having kids and siblings that you need to support. And unfortunately, in that process, a lot of their businesses are not even supported by formal institutions like banking versus those of males. Majority of female businesses are smaller than those of the males. So, we see stats that actually shows that a lot of, in terms of percentage-wise, it's almost 0% to 7% versus men of 7% of organizations that have 20 employees plus of women in organizations. So there are fewer of those organizations. And how most of those organizations are supported, they are through personal savings, family savings, whilst men are able to actually be able to go to institutions to get that formal support. So it is really critical that we kind of get to that gender disaggregation, because in a lot of, for example, whether it be government or even private sector, to be able to sometimes even ask how much of your procurement is actually going to female. Only few organizations can even tell you that or can articulate that. They'll even say, I don't know, somewhere, I'm sure there is some female organization, but somebody needs to consciously be running that effort. And somebody needs to be conscious about it so that we can start to see. Ipelen was referring to, yes, there's the big tenders, and then there's a big gap in the middle, and then there's a small one. But who is actually, somebody needs to lead the trajectory where the smaller one starts to get into the middle-sized organizations. And then, of course, the big ones as well needs to be able to say, in our process of being big enough, who are we enterprising, and who are we working together with? So in closing, really, I think there's a lot of ways in which we can actually better empower women. A lot of organization, we need to, and in advocacy, we need to be recognized. Research and policy, Ipene mentioned that. Access to women-specific support, market access and development is an important one. Communication and access to information is another one. Providing focus and specific training. I'm even tempted to actually say even DFIs that are supportive of women, meaning in the DFIs, even those that exist, to actually put a particular target that says this needs to go to women, because continuously you go there and it says, oh no, it's all done, oh no, it's finished, no, we're not, and half of the time is actually gone to the typical male organizations that actually have have been running those supports. So I think in all of these things, I think we need that disaggregated data so that we are aware and we start to understand, so that we are consciously able to drive our efforts in line with our targets that we would wish to see. So in a lot of cases in such platforms, we need to actually really be able to lobby and continuously preach the message of what information are you putting out there to be able to consciously be able to say, this is who I'm supporting and that's why I'm supporting, and here's my aim or the target that I'm aiming towards as my organization towards supporting women.
Thank you so much, Portia. You mentioned quite a lot of different aspects that we really still need to delve deeper into, and perhaps we could have a follow-up session where we really target these different segments and really see who is going to be championing it and how are we going to be championing it forward. I see comments are flooding in the chat box, and however, we've run out of time. It's already 10 minutes past. I'd just like to highlight a few. Amanda says, I appreciate this discussion because as a young woman in business, climbing the ladder is difficult when you stand your ground and work hard. The comparison to how a man would have handled the situation is discouraging. I worked in a mining sector and men dominate the board with not much room for women to be allocated higher positions. Thank you to all the speakers. So we are really getting some feedback here where women are feeling inspired by this discussion. Nsuku says this was a great session. Thank you, ladies. And Witumelo is also willing to carry this conversation forward. She says that she works for the Association of the Construction Industry, and she would really like to expose her female members to more resources and platforms such as this ones that empower and increase our networks, which goes back to what Ipuleng speaks about, us being an ecosystem by ourselves. Without further ado, I'm not able to do all the comments. If Coco could just give us her closing remarks and before we say goodbye.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Trifina. I think we've talked a lot about biases, and it seems like a big part of the challenge we have is all the different biases we have, both men and women. And I think all these things start in our homes. So there's a lot of work that we can all do, starting in our homes, because the domestic becomes the public. A lot of what we're talking about is public, right? The public challenges that we have. But the public challenge is not devoid of what happens in our homes. And whether it's in our boys, it's in our girls, our lovers, our partners, the men in our lives, our brothers, our uncles, all those are people we can influence at a domestic, informal level before they come into the public space. Because if they're not transformed in the domestic level, there is no way they're going to transform automatically in the public domain. So we all have work to do. And that is what I encourage all of us, because we are all change agents in our homes. I have 3 boys. I take this job very seriously. I have a wonderful husband, but I want to make him even more wonderful. I have brothers that I'm chasing all the time to make sure, and so we can do it. But it starts with all of us doing a bit of this in our domestic settings at all times. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was quite, an inspiring, discussion for myself as well. I'd like to really thank all our panelists for their time. I'm sure they are busy women. They've got so much to do, but just pouring out, from their expertise, really it goes a long way. It may just seem like a discussion that we're having, but what you have mentioned has really kind of created a light bulb moment for myself, and I'm sure also for some of the participants. And I thank you very much, and thanks to all the participants who also attended and have been quite engaging as well. And I will definitely share the contact information via email from those who are interested to get in touch with one another, and we'll continue this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Trifina. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Trifina.
Thanks, Neo. Lovely to see you. Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Yes,
Thank you, Trifina. Great session.
Thank you, Julia. Nice to see you. Thanks, Pumza. Deshni, nice to see you.
Thank you, Trifina. This was excellent.
And it's good to see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Trifina. Excellent work.
Thanks for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matepo. Thanks, Gugu. Bye-bye.